small group of determined women is just unstoppable, really.
The city can't keep women silent any longer.
We are demanding that our local government respond to the needs of 50% of the population.
There is nothing more important to do than to have a gender lens over our policies and priorities.
We need a strong commission. We need a strong department who's fighting to make sure that all of our gains are preserved.
And to make sure that your voice is at the table.
Before commissions began forming around the country, there was very little information about the issues facing women. There was no data, there was no research. I have been active with City and County Women's Commission since 1975, the first World Conference on Women. And it was 1976 when city commissions were actually formed, with San Francisco being one of the first.
You know, the idea that self-esteem, as Gloria Steinem has said, is the most revolutionary of qualities, is something that women come to kind of late in life. And I think that being on an elected city commission that people actually paid attention to and that had some serious success where it made a big difference, I think gave a sense of empowerment that there are things that you can do to enhance equality in the society, and that city office, which people are often so cynical about, really can make for extraordinarily powerful change.
When I was on the commission, we did not do grants, we did not give out money, and so it was more advocacy and education awareness. The role now of the commission is a much more bigger role, which is great.
I think it's important that the commission evolved into a department within the city. It again sort of legitimized and validated the importance of the work of the commission. The commission develops policy, department implements those policies.
Can't find another department anywhere in the country. Our commission is the strongest commission in the country as well. We have a budget and we have staff, unlike most commissions on women.
The thing that I like the most about working with this department and commission is the diversity of opinions that are expressed, the diversity of issues that we work on, and the direct impact that we could see from the work.
We're still facing glass ceilings. We're still facing all of the issues of women getting into the workforce and not getting into the executive ranks and not being represented at board level.
I've been at meetings when department staff are raising the concerns of women and girls in the city, and looking at what is law enforcement doing to keep us safe, what's happening with the prosecutor's office to keep us safe. It brings quite a bit of peace of mind and quite a bit of pride, frankly.
It's just a great exchange of information. It's a great sisterhood. It's really a home for the work that's being done around domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking, and violence against women in general.
What the commission and the department is about is solving problems with public dollars.
Today, the commission allocates more than $6 million in grants annually to programs that benefit more than 24,000 survivors of violence. Now that's real progress.
I think one of the things we could cite more than anything else over the past few years has been the amazing work on domestic violence in the workplace and how this department really led the way.
I was the chair of the first committee on domestic violence. At that time, the police department had no general order to prevent domestic violence, and there was no federal law to protect women against domestic violence. The number one cause of murder was a result of domestic violence at the time. And there were plenty of them. And unfortunately, the media, that was a problem. They weren't always reporting correctly how women got shot or knifed or killed. They never really mentioned the word domestic violence. So it was a really important need to communicate to media to report these kinds of cases accurately and for the police to report accurately. It was really some very sort of groundmaking work that our staff and our commission was involved in. So we were hoping to educate not only our city leaders within the departments to reinforce the complaint process, and make those more effective and responsible, and to minimize the number of lawsuits that were going to occur because of complaints not being addressed properly.
Mayor Ed Lee, a real champion.
Ending violence against women in San Francisco is a top priority for his administration. He's been excellent. In fact, we've almost doubled the funding for domestic violence, sexual assault, and trafficking programs in San Francisco. That really has a direct impact into the community. Those are all direct services. So those are, advocates, attorneys, crisis line workers on the ground helping survivors every day. If you make a call in San Francisco, somebody's going to be there to answer it.
The transit campaigns have proven to be remarkably successful. By example, I will tell you that the other day, someone was sitting on the bus and called us from the bus seeking assistance. So we know we're reaching people, not just reaching victims and survivors, but reaching a broader audience of individuals in 3 languages.
We have focused over 10 years on the issue of domestic violence, starting with the Venus Sharon case and the Claire Joyce Timpango case.
Claire Joyce Timpango was a young woman in San Francisco who had been battered for quite some time, and she really did what we would all consider to be everything right. She filed police reports, she had a restraining order, her case was prosecuted, her offender did some jail time, he was in a batterers intervention program. He really did everything that the system had to offer, and she still ended up being killed in front of her children. So it was a horrible tragedy for the city, and certainly something that we knew we had to learn from so it didn't happen again. So the commission and the department really went about figuring out what could be done better, what could we learn from this tragedy. And about 400 recommendations after 2 or 3 years of work came out of the city attorney's office in collaboration with the Commission on the Status of Women, and we've really been learning from that ever since.
So much so that 10 years ago, we used to have something like 10 domestic violence homicides a year. Mostly women, mostly by their intimate partners. There was a period between 2010 and 2014, sort of the fruits of our work, where we eliminated domestic violence homicides to 0.
And I've asked myself, and all of our colleagues have asked themselves thousands of times, how did that happen? I really think it was, in some ways, a byproduct of the work that we did after the Claire Joyce Timpango case. I think it was really an all-hands-on-deck attitude. Probation officers sitting with police departments, sitting with advocates, sitting with attorneys could really talk about how cases are handled. 911 dispatchers could really come to the conversation and talk about how that first call is managed. Was so important. And I also think we raised the public's awareness so people knew that there was help out there.
So we know what it takes: training, early intervention, resources to eliminate domestic violence homicide. That's one of our proudest accomplishments, and that is gaining a lot of attention.
So one of the things that came out of the work that the commission, the department, the community, and law enforcement did was issue a report called the Justice and Courage Report. And Justice and Courage really referred to what Claire Joyce Timpango and so many other survivors of domestic violence had shown in their pursuit of happiness, freedom, justice, was justice and courage. One of the things we found out was that departments were not really communicating with each other. Nobody really knew where that case was sitting. Nobody knew that he was on a work release program. Nobody knew how far along in the system that case had gone. And I don't think anybody was really communicating that with Claire Joyce or her advocates. All of that has changed due to the work of the commission. After the commission released the report, they formed the Justice and Courage Oversight Panel. That brought together the heads of the president of the Commission on the Status of Women, which started out being Susan Leal, and then it went to Fiona Ma, and then to Dorka Keene, and currently Andrea Shorter. So we've had great leadership at that table. That table has also included the District Attorney's Office, the Police Department, many organizations doing domestic violence work here in the city, and we really took all of those recommendations to heart and have broken out over these years into work groups and implemented most of them.
La Casa was really, at the forefront of the shelter movement, starting a shelter here in San Francisco specifically for battered women and their children in 1976.
When I became mayor of San Francisco, it was a time when this commission was on the verge of being eliminated. I was so proud to work with local advocates to ensure that all San Franciscans were aware of the value of legal help, counseling, and shelter for victims of domestic violence. And I remember in 1980, the commission issued its first grant of $75,000 for the first domestic shelter in California, La Casa de las Madres.
La Casa played, I believe, a very important part by being part of the Justice and Courage Oversight Panel, which was a panel that was convened first to do an audit of law enforcement's response to domestic violence, and then to I would like to say, manage or shepherd through a set of recommendations that would really change the way the city and law enforcement responds to these acts of domestic violence or victims asking for help, really responding in a very comprehensive and holistic way. I would say that the work of the Commission on the Status of Women and law enforcement has opened the door for law enforcement to be able to invite in advocates at 850 Bryant to respond in the moment to victims as they are seeking help navigating through the criminal legal system. And I think that that's vitally important. Whether a victim decides they want to go ahead and proceed with a criminal case or not, that to have a friendly face there, an advocate who's going to stand with them is really important. And that all is an outspring, I believe, of the kind of collaborative work that has happened between the Commission on the Status of Women and other community-based organizations.
Community leaders and certainly the Commission on the Status of Women demanded that we have a task force to really take a different look and have a different type of approach to not only policy and service provision, but how do we make sure that every single employee in the city and county of San Francisco, no matter what your department, becomes more aware of the issues of domestic violence? How do we make sure that the issues around domestic violence are elevated beyond the kind of narrative that had been set? And then now that task force or the committee has become part of our Family Violence Council.
With the Family Violence Council, what you see is all of the different parts of government that are trying to tackle the issues connected to child abuse, domestic violence, and elder abuse coming together and really figuring out what they most have to offer to address many of the challenges.
The goal is not only to reach victims and survivors, but to reach the community at large and change those public perceptions.
San Francisco is on the FBI's top 13 list for destinations for child sex trafficking. It's a list we don't want to be on. One of the things that we have taken on is making the invisible visible. So we will be releasing the second human trafficking report that documents 499 cases of human trafficking, many children, here in San Francisco. Some people think that human trafficking occurs somewhere overseas, far away, but it's happening right here with our kids,
a lot of foster kids, a lot of runaways, LGBT kids, some boys, but it's a problem that we are trying to make visible.
The work that your group does on behalf of domestic violence and trafficking victims, I want you to know is just essential to San Francisco. And I want you also to know this is an issue of great importance to me. Simply put, trafficking is a blight on humanity. Human trafficking is a $32 billion criminal enterprise today. It's the second largest criminal industry in the world behind the drug trade, and it's functioning in our city. Victims are often as young as 12 and 13, and more than 80% of sex trafficking victims in the United States are, in fact, American citizens. I've spent my career working with law enforcement to find solutions to end this terrible trade. And groups like yours are really a key ally in this fight.
When I started this job 13 years ago, nobody was talking about human trafficking. We were focused on domestic violence, on sexual assault, but that was not even a topic of conversation. So when then Mayor Gavin Newsom, then District Attorney Kamala Harris, then President of the Board of Supervisors David Chu supported us, we started the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking. It really showed how we were pushing the envelope. We were far ahead of other communities in recognizing trafficking as a problem.
What was singing to my heart at the time was the work that we do in gender equity. We started setting up roundtables and a gender equality challenge that actually invited companies here in the Bay Area, in San Francisco specifically, to share their best practices around gender equality. Technology companies are getting on board. They're realizing that if they don't change their policies, that they're not going to have the outcomes that they want. And as we saw from the work that Calvert has done on the Calvert principles that they first came out with around gender equality, that organizations that have more women in leadership roles and on the boards, they have better economic returns to their investors as well. So there's an economic imperative as well as a social and moral imperative. And through partnering between the Friends and the Department and the Commission on the Status of Women, the Bay Area Council has now launched a best practices guide for gender equality in corporate America, to share their best practices around gender equality and what they have done to make a difference in removing glass ceiling, as well as looking at pay equity, healthy workplace for mothers, etc.
The gender equality principles is very important to all companies in the Bay Area, whether they're based here or not. For my company, Morgan Stanley, the gender equality principles are very, very important to us to be able to judge or to score ourselves, see how we stack up against other companies, and why a diverse workforce is so important. I think there's been multiple studies that show that having a diverse workforce is very profitable to a company.
Until we have complete pay parity, until it's, men's dollar equals a woman's dollar, until women are free from violence, be it domestic violence, be it violence on a college campus, there's just a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that there's wage equity and gender equity. And we need everybody to be part of the solution.
The Friends are here to raise awareness and to raise funds for the work of the department and the Commission on the Status of Women. But by being a member of the Friends, you become connected to a group of men and women who really want to make a difference.
Whatever part of your career you happen to be in, whether you're young or a senior or more experienced or just starting out in your career, being part of the strength of a membership organization like the Friends helps us keep women at the table. And joining the Friends organization will ensure that that continues.
Hopefully, a lot of the women who come to the Friends and become members of the Friends will learn about what happens in our city, and it'll make them want to become involved, maybe run for office, run for council, someday be the mayor, the governor, the president.
One of the very first events that I worked on after I joined the Friends board was an event called Tea and Conversation. Brought them into the beautiful Mark Hopkins Hotel, and these girls were also sitting at tables that had women who were working in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and sort of fostering their interest by subject area. Just to see them take the mic and be assertive and, ask questions and just really sort of grow in their ability. And just those 2 hours that we were all together was extraordinary to watch. Now I'm really excited that we're expanding the reach from 100 girls to quite possibly 5,000 girls. We love having partnerships with like-minded organizations where we don't duplicate each other's efforts, and in fact we build upon the work that each of us is doing so that we're stronger in delivering services to girls. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the public, girls, agencies who are serving girls all know about each other and that we're able to support each other's missions.
This organization ultimately is about leadership and empowerment. If you are a woman working and living in San Francisco, there is a place for you in the Friends.
At the Department of Status of Women, we're really committed to advancing women's human rights. This goes back to the establishment of the Commission 40 years ago and the Friends shortly after. But one of the key focuses of the Commission and the Department's work has been on CEDAW, the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women.
CEDAW affects women on a day-to-day basis and their communities. It covers safety on the streets, health care, street lights, violence against women, pay equity.
It's actually an international Bill of Rights, and some people call it the Women Human Rights Treaty. If I have the dates right, in 1978, the United Nations promulgated the treaty, and then President Jimmy Carter actually signed it for the United States. Mysteriously, it has languished for about 40 years in the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, unratified. And the women of San Francisco were just appalled by this state of events and really organized successfully a grassroots movement to socialize the importance of the CEDAW Treaty. And in 1998, San Francisco became the first city in the world to implement the principles of CEDAW under a local ordinance.
The CEDAW ordinance for the city and county of San Francisco, oh my goodness, talk about something really powerful. To know that you're sitting on the commission that has been empowered, that took the idea of adopting for its municipality CEDAW, I think was really a revolutionary act. Certainly we need to have CEDAW adapted, ratified for the United States, but we didn't wait for the United States. We decided here in San Francisco that we need to be a leader in the implementation of the principles of CEDAW. And so we really rolled up our sleeves and set to task and to plan a course of action on how do we integrate the principles of CEDAW in all that we do through the Commission, all of our policy work, allocation of resources for programs, and how do we make sure that the programs, especially the domestic violence programs, as best as possible, are in accordance, are operating in accordance with many of those principles.
The CEDAW Awards ceremony is so incredible because it gives the platform for all of these very, very important issues that the Department and the Commission in San Francisco are tangling with. And this ceremony really affords unparalleled access for the attendees to meet these awardees and for the awardees to meet one another. You know, the common characteristics among the honorees, ranging from somebody like Nancy Pelosi to Marilyn Fowler, who is the founder of the Women's Intercultural Network, are leadership, passion to advance women's human rights, and a perseverance to go, against all odds.
As a result of our partnership with the Commission and working together at the UN, we were asked by the UN leadership to put together a campaign called the U.S. Cities for CEDAW campaign to put ordinances in 100 U.S. cities. From a successful campaign launched at the United Nations in 2014, we were invited to Geneva last year to report to the United Nations High Commission on Human Rights Cities for CEDAW Committee.
The UN CEDAW Committee, who has never heard from any American delegations because the U.S. is not signatory to CEDAW, invited the Cities for CEDAW advocates to Geneva to speak about what we're doing on the ground locally to advance women's human rights, where I could share how this investment of over 10 years in policy reform has resulted in saving lives, women's lives.
We are on this campaign, along with Mayor Ed Lee, to make sure that not only is San Francisco living the principles of CEDAW, but we're spreading the wealth.
The work that we have been doing to engage cities now for four years to really strive to look at themselves as local leaders who can have a global impact and take issues and take laws and make them work for their communities is something that will last for a very long time.
And to know that there are dozens of really smart, successful, committed change makers who are trying to move the needle to help women and girls in San Francisco. So that's just been extraordinary.
Having this focus on women's leadership has been so important for the Commission and the department. I know that some people come to the Commission not having any experience, but they move on to other commissions, to elected office. So it's really been an amazing training ground for women in leadership.
I've seen transgender commissioners, I've seen commissioners of every race, every age. I think of Caroline Marks. I think of so many women who really have reflected San Francisco's diversity in that commission. And I think that makes a huge difference, not only to the city itself, but the survivors that we serve. I think it's good for people to see somebody who looks like them, who understands their experience on the Commission on the Status of Women.
The fact that we do have this era of sexual harassment and sexual assault on college campuses completely underscores the need, the continuing need for entities like the Department on the Status of Women, the Commission, and organizations like Friends that support their work.
With anything that's seen as groundbreaking, right? And isn't it something that it's groundbreaking for women to have a voice, right? I think that's something that the San Francisco Commission on the Status of Women and Department on the Status of Women can really be proud of. And to have the resource of the Commission as someone who lives in San Francisco, someone who's running a business here, as someone who has heard, well, you can't do that, you're pregnant with a child. You can't do that, you're about to have a second child. As a woman who has heard that all too many times, having a commission here in San Francisco, having a Friends organization, it means that my two daughters hopefully won't have to go through that same kind of experience, and hopefully they won't, I mean, there might be some other messages, but they won't have to hear the message that you can't do that.
The Commission really has been a trailblazer. Cities around the country have used your model of your Commission for their own efforts, from Berkeley to Louisville, Los Angeles to Salt Lake City. The San Francisco Department on the Status of Women that inspired a framework for their other anti-domestic violence and trafficking programs across the country is so important.
We continue to be not only a national model, but an international model in terms of how municipalities, how local government can be effective and can really make sure that the issues and needs of women and girls and families are addressed, and done so in a collaborative way, done so in an effective way, done so through government, done so through private sector partnerships, and done so on a variety of issues and all manner of addressing these issues. So to me, the fact that we are here and celebrating 40 years of this commission's work and the Department on the Status of Women's work, I think in and of itself is a great and proud achievement. I think that it's made our city a better place, not just for women, but for all San Franciscans.